Welcome back to CBS Sports HQ. The 2023 NFL Scouting Combine is complete. And in terms of combine grades for the quarterback class, at least the guys who were there, Anthony Richardson tops the board. He gets an A. C.J. Stroud, A- for him, alongside Stetson Bennett, the national champion. Will Levis getting the B+. And then it's down to the letters I saw a lot of on my report cards. C's and C-. At least there were no D's or F's in there, so that's the good thing. Let's get into some post-combine chatter and talk winners and losers with a guy who's already a big winner, our Brady Quinn. Let's start with the talk of the draft. Anthony Richardson, obviously, he is a big winner here.
Yeah, he's a big winner because he was set up to succeed. You know, the Combine, the Underwear Olympics, however you want to go about describing it. I mean, that's what we talked about it as players. But the truth of the matter is he's the most athletic I think we've seen at this position in quite some time. I mean, for him to be at his size, standing with almost 6'4", 245 pounds, to be able to run a 4.4 40, to jump over 40 inches on his vertical, those are all things that you saw on film you knew he was capable of, especially when he's doing backflips at the end of the workout. Where I think he was able to win, or at least in the eyes of a lot of the talent evaluators, is showcasing the arm strength. We knew walking into it he had a strong arm, but when you put him up against everyone else in this draft class, he by far and away has the strongest arm. And he's got that skill set and the tools that you can build around if you're an organization and if you give him time, because he's really only had 1 year of this sort of success. So the reality is he was set up to succeed, but he did exactly what he needed to do coming into the combine, showing off his athleticism and showing off that howitzer for an arm.
And, made some great throws at the combine. And as you mentioned, with that size and that speed, obviously a lot of teams are going to be looking at him that maybe weren't necessarily looking at him before, but certainly that draft stock is on the rise. There's even some talk about possibly being number one.
Yeah, because everyone's looking for Josh Allen. You know, if you go back to Josh Allen as a prospect out of Wyoming, he was big, he was athletic, he had a strong arm, and there wasn't a ton of great tape, but you saw flashes of what he was capable of. You probably see actually a little bit more with it with Anthony Richardson this past year for Florida, but just not consistently enough. And so that's why my only caution is for any team that drafts Anthony Richardson, you have to give it time.
Yes.
You have to surround him with talent, surround him with stability, and allow him, much like Josh Allen, to have 3 years in a system with the same OC, much of the same talent, and then you bring in a star wide receiver like Stephon Diggs, and you start to see what he's capable of. So that's what Anthony Richardson needs. Whether or not he gets in the NFL, your guess is as good as mine.
Jacqueline DiAugustino's off to the side of the set there, pumping her fist, because she's been talking about Anthony Richardson all season long. He is 7th in Ryan Wilson's latest mock draft. He has him going to the Raiders. All right, I saw a post-combine article today that said if you haven't bought stock in wide receiver Trey Palmer, you better buy it quick because it is about to skyrocket. His 40 time was the fastest at the draft, but he wasn't just speed, Brady. He showed that he really fits the role of a wide receiver.
Yeah, and he's got an interesting story, right? He went to LSU originally as a 4-star recruit. We knew about his track background and the speed that he had. It didn't really work out during the course of time there. He transfers to Nebraska. He becomes the go-to guy. He goes over 1,000 yards this past season, catches a bunch of touchdown passes as well. And then the thing that stood out, and this is really what it's about, when you're trying to differentiate yourself from a group of wide receivers or other players at your position, it's about doing something extraordinary. And Trey Palmer did that. He ran the fastest 40 we saw for wide receivers, where if there was guys who maybe looked at him and said, okay, maybe he's a late round pick, 5th, 6th, 7th, somewhere in there, he might have jumped up the draft boards. And he might have jumped up for a lot of talented evaluators who are looking going, I need to go back and watch that tape again because I didn't know Trey Palmer was that fast. So to me, he's a big-time winner because coming into the Combine, you weren't hearing a ton of talk about Trey Palmer. Even though he had a great season for Nebraska, now being the fastest wide receiver in the Combine, you're going to be a lot more people talking about him being a mid-round potential pick, maybe even flying him in the second round as everyone's looking for big playmakers and they're looking for speed.
Speaking of 40 times, we have to mention Nolan Smith, the defensive lineman, clocking at 4.39. He was slated to be a late first-round selection, but that might be changing.
It was huge for him. You know, his entire Combine performance. It wasn't just the 40, and I think as an edge player, to me, the thing that stood out really was his 10-yard split. That's one of the things that you're going to look at. So the 40 looks daunting, but even the 10-yard split as part of that is what he's going to have to be able to do when he jumps off the line of scrimmage trying to go sack the quarterback. But he needed to perform this way. Like, this is more of the story for Nolan Smith in this draft class is you saw the tape, you're impressed with everything that he did, but then the Combine results had to be extraordinary once again to differentiate him because he is smaller at the position. He's not the biggest guy. He's undersized for an edge player at the next level. So he had to showcase this sort of athleticism. Kudos to him. He's been training, he's been preparing and working out for it, and he seized the moment.
Well, and he was mad, too. He said he wasn't even running at full speed, and then he got the phone call from his team saying, okay, you got to shut it down. He wanted to run again. So he was visibly frustrated because he thinks that he can go even faster than that.
That's some of the conversation behind the scenes. People don't realize this because, like, wait, this guy ran this, but he didn't do this again. It's like, yeah, you've got an agent telling you, like, hey, you're good, shut it down. You don't want to risk potentially getting injured. We did see an offensive lineman out of Southern Cal and Voorhees who got injured during the combine. That's the sort of thing that can set you back and really impact your draft stock.
Yeah, and if you can do it once, get it right, and it's a good time, then why do you need to do it again? Lastly, among the winners, Iowa linebacker Jack Campbell had questions about his athleticism and speed going into Indy. Those questions were answered.
Yeah, his film is phenomenal. All right, you might as well call this guy Captain America because he looks like that. He could easily replace Chris Evans and all those Marvel movies about him, right? He's 6'5", 250 pounds. That's an old school linebacker, but he doesn't move like that. Look, the 4.65 40, it's not the fastest. In fact, it was one of the slower for the linebackers, but he's got a 1.59 10-yard split. That to me is impressive. That's actually better than some safeties, and it was actually tied with the worst cornerback 10-yard split. And he dominated the 3-cone, the shuttle, all the other drills you're looking at showing that change of the direction, the stop start, everything you're looking for. And I would just say this, for anyone who wants their middle linebacker to run a fast 40-yard dash, if you've got him running a straight line for 40 yards, it's not a good thing. The ball's already probably behind him, and the play's already over. So Jack Campbell's the type of guy that his film was phenomenal this year, but this sort of performance really showcases that he's well-rounded and he can move for the size that he is.
I didn't think you would know the Marvel guys, Brady, because you're built and look
like
Superman.
I love the whole Marvel series, but DC as well. I mean, both of them. My kids are always into the superhero stuff too.
Okay, let's talk about players whose draft stock may have dropped as a result of the combine. LSU wide receiver KeShawn Boots had his numbers fall below expectations. So when this type of thing happens, what do you do now?
The tough thing is you try to improve it in your pro day. I mean, that's the biggest thing for him, and especially when you're talking about guys who are at the skill position, wide receivers, cornerbacks, you're going to go back and work on the start of your 40-yard dash. And KeShawn Boots is a player who he didn't hit the sub 4.4s, which is what you'd like to see at a minimum. He was a 4.5 guy, and I know it's not too far off, but we just talked about Jack Campbell's split of a 1.59 at linebacker. You can see the split there for KeShawn Boots at 1.58. It's not great, so he can improve these numbers. Here's the reality. He was a 5-star prospect that went to LSU. Never truly lived up to the billing, and there's a lot of things that can factor into that for him, but he needed a combine performance. I've used the word differentiate before. He needed the one that was going to separate him from the rest of the group. It didn't work out that way in any capacity, whether you're talking about his vertical, broad jump, all those different measurables. He just didn't show out the way he needed to. So he'll go back, he'll work out, try to find a way of helping improving a lot of those numbers at his pro day.
Utah cornerback Phillips is known for carrying a notebook with him so he can jot down his thoughts and some of his goals, I think he picked up from his dad. After his combine experience, he may be filling up a few pages, Brady.
Yeah, look, he's an undersized player. He's an absolute savage on film. He's a ball hawk, but again, another guy didn't run the best 40. And the toughest thing for cornerbacks, and one of the reasons why you like to see these guys be the faster of the two groups between wide receivers and cornerbacks are, well, he's usually a reactionary player. So he's going to be trailing a wide receiver. You better be able to catch up. Didn't run the best 40, didn't perform overly well as far as the other testing goes, at least not what he put out there on tape. And so he's another player you'd look at and say, all right, how can we improve some of these numbers once we get to the pro day and see if we can't run faster, jump higher, all the things that the talent evaluators are looking for. But especially as an undersized player, as you can see, sitting at 5'8", 183, you have to be able to jump to be able to match those bigger bodied wide receivers. You have to have the recovery speed where if you get beat, you can then get back into phase at the hip of that wide receiver and break up the ball. A lot of those things, it didn't really work out for him in Indy. Hopefully it will once he gets to his pro day.
Talking combine winners and losers with Brady Quinn here on HQ. Michigan went to the college football playoff this past season, and defensive end Mike Morris was part of that defense. Played in 11 games, recorded 9 sacks, 19 quarterback hurries, but here was another guy whose numbers didn't match the expectations for him in Indianapolis.
No, and it's a bit surprising. He's one of the top rushers in the Big Ten this year as far as the sacks, as you just kind of touched on. And watching the tape this year, you would see stretches of games where he really showed out. Maryland was one, Indiana was one. There's a couple stretch kind of in there. The problem was you get into some of those tougher games versus Penn State, Ohio State with better tackles. he somewhat disappeared. And so what he needed to prove was at his size, being about 292 pounds, which is a big boy. He's more of your old school, traditional defensive end, but you got to still showcase some of the explosion, some of that, not necessarily so much in the 40-yard dash, but that 10-yard split. Didn't showcase that really in any capacity. So to me, he's one of those candidates that he might be a guy that you look at moving further down inside because he's probably closer to how a 3 technique is going to test and run than he would be an edge player. It'll be interesting to see if he can improve upon some of those numbers because, again, that didn't match up the tape. When you watched him in games at times this year, he was a great game wrecker. You didn't see that so much at the Combine with how he tested.
What did you call the Combine again? The underwear?
The Underwear Olympics.
The Underwear Olympics. Funny that you should say that, Brady.
Yeah, there you go.
Speaking of the Underwear Olympics, we've got some.
Is that Rick Spielman? Is that Rick Spielman right there, man? Who is that? It looks like Rick from
It does kind of look like Rick Spielman there. Look at you, shirtless Brady at the Combine.
There you go. They do your height, they do your hand size, they do your wingspan, they do your arm length. You're sitting there in your skivvies on a scale.
You never wore a shirt the whole time.
No, you're told not to. That's the whole thing, is no one's up there wearing a shirt. So when I say Underwear Olympics, this is where we get it from, people. This is what it is. You're in your skivvies up there in front of everyone.
And it wasn't even an HD, and they still look great, Brady.
Thank you.
Still look great, buddy. There'll be plenty more on the Combine, all the numbers and what they mean over on With the First Pick. Speaking of Rick Spielman, he and mock draft expert Ryan Wilson diving deep into what we all saw on their podcast. You can download and follow With the First Pick wherever you get your podcasts.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.